welcome to the Space Policy Show. I'm your host, Rebecca Rose. Welcome to today's episode, Allies and Partners by Design. We talked to General Kevin Whale of the Royal Canadian Air Force, who is currently serving as Deputy Commanding General for Transformation in the Space Operations Command, one of the three field commands for U.S. Space Force. He'll be talking to Jamie Morin, Executive Director of Aerospace's Center for Space Policy and Strategy, about his role in the Space Force and the importance of continuing to build international partnerships. Now over to Jamie.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. It is a real pleasure to welcome General Kevin Whale to the Space Policy Show this week. General Whale, thank you for taking the time to join us and talk a little bit about the transformation that's underway in space, and hopefully to reflect a little bit on where the U.S. Space Force is going, where the Space Operations Command is going, where U.S. Space Command is going, and where the U.S.-Canadian collaboration in pursuit of space security is going. We're really delighted to have you and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So I have to begin by offering a welcome to a neighbor. I'm just back from a visit to my hometown of Detroit, Canada's neighbor to the north, as we refer to ourselves, and actually had a chance to look a little bit through your background and notice we have some common heritage. I actually have on both my parents' family side folks who came over from your part of Ontario to Michigan in the 19th century. So I guess that makes me a Canadian American. That's redundant, isn't it?
That's okay. I'm an honorary American right now too, so it's all good.
So speaking of which, I understand that you're stationed now out in Colorado Springs, and that there is a robust Canadian service member population out there between NORAD, NORTHCOM, and folks serving in roles like yours. And I understand there's a serious Canadian hockey team out there. Are you a fan and participant?
So unfortunately, I'm probably one of the only Canadians that doesn't play hockey. But I'm sure whatever the Canadian, shocking, but whatever the rest of the Canadian group here is playing, there's no such thing as a non-serious Canadian hockey game. So I'm sure they're fully engaged on that. Yeah, there's a long-standing contingent for over 6 decades, obviously through our NORAD engagement. There's about 30 Canadians and 8 different U.S. units, including a significant element here for the NORAD group, which I interact with, and they support me administratively. But I'm actually a bit of a one-off here because I'm working with the Space Force. I'm not engaged in any NORAD business directly, other than some interdependencies with some of the NORAD space detachment that is distributed across different units.
Yeah, one of the really tremendous privileges of my career was during the year I spent as the acting undersecretary of the U.S. Air Force, and in that role I had a number of foreign officers working on my direct staff, and again, all of the different roles, right? Folks in liaison roles, folks as exchange officers, and folks directly assigned. And for the non-expert, it can certainly be confusing, but it is a tribute to the depth of the partnership. Let me ask you to reflect a little bit on your current role. You're serving as our Deputy Commanding General for Transformation within the U.S. Space Force's Space Operations Command under Lieutenant General Stephen Whiting. Can you talk a little bit about the role of the Space Operations Command and what exactly you're leading the transformation of?
Yeah, so I got here about 1.5 years ago when Canada found out that space was moving from U.S. Stratcom to here in Colorado Springs. We started looking at, did we have the right level of exchange and liaison officers in the right positions? And one of the positions that was discussed and eventually agreed upon was to put a brigadier general in this headquarters, which was still forming and a little bit undefined at the time. So I came down initially as an advisor to General Whiting, which allowed him to use me in any way that he wanted. And then as this command re-engineered and redesigned, General Whiting decided on a 3 1-star deputy commanding general design. So we've got the deputy commanding general for operations, sustainment support, and then my team under transformation. So as Air Force Space Command kind of pulled apart and the redesign was going on, that organized, train, equip role that Air Force Space Command was really leading previously is now split between 3 field commands. So you've got our command, Space Operations Command, Space System Command, which is focused on acquisition, and then the newly formed Space Training and Readiness Command, STARCOM, which is focused on training, readiness, experimentation, those kind of things. So now that organized, train, equip role is spread across 3 field commands. We're still getting our feet underneath of us, and we're now kind of in a phase where we now need to verify the interdependencies and the communication links between our commands to collectively now provide as a part of the service that organized, train, equip role. And of course, here in Building 1, we work right across from U.S. Space Command, which is conducting the operations. So Space Operations Command, we're focused on generate, present, and sustain. So we generate the capabilities that are presented on behalf of the service, the Space Command, and then the sustainment of those capabilities. So that's our niche focus right now, is generate, present, sustain. My role here is leading a team of about 125 positions focused on the transformation element. We squeezed pretty hard in our size. As you know, Space Force is trying to be as lean as possible. We went from 7 layers to 3, and part of that was in Space Operations Command. We were designing as lean as we could. And it's not insignificant that General Whiting saw the benefits of having a team focused on transformation. Everyone in ops and sustainment is so busy, transformation can't be a part-time job. There's got to be a team focused on it 24/7 to achieve the level of ambition that Space Force has set.
One of the consistent themes from Space Force leadership since even before the creation of the service was the need for it to be a light and lean organization. Obviously, it's much smaller than any of the other military services in the U.S. system, and particularly when it comes to operating at the combatant command level or in the Pentagon, it can be hard to be effective when you're light and lean. You're dealing with large organizations. The transformation agenda and figuring out how to do things in a much more agile way would seem to be key to that effectiveness. As you're sort of charting out the agenda there, what are the biggest things in your mind where this new service and the Space Operations Command specifically within it needs to think differently and structure itself differently and function differently in order to be effective yet small?
Yeah, so overall, you've probably heard comparisons of when Space Force was standing up. We still have a huge reliance on the foundational Air Force ecosystem. We obviously have Guardians, but as well airmen throughout our organization as we continue to stand up and evolve. You've probably heard comparisons of, the Navy has the Marines, and now the Air Force has, the regular Air Force, and now it's got Space Force. I think maybe a better analogy, given our lean objectives, or maybe something like Special Operations Forces. Now, we're obviously not screened to the same level as soft forces, but how they operate, we've got to be kind of closer to that model, as close as we can get. To be this lean and achieve what we're trying to achieve, we really do have to do things more agile and faster as much as we can, without forgetting that we're still connected to the larger Air Force infrastructure, which we have to integrate with. In my team, I've kind of got 5 sections. So I've got the Chief Data Officer, I've got the Director of Digital Transformation, I've got an astrodynamics team, I've got military partnerships and international affairs, and then I've got an innovation team. So between those 5 elements, some of them are still doing some some semi-traditional, what I would call continental staff, a six function between us and operations. But operations is focused on ops, and in the six role more on the cyber piece. Anything IT, infrastructure, data management, that's me and my team to try and chart a path forward. So we re-engineered last summer. We've kind of done the storming, forming, storming, norming. We're hopefully getting into some performing pieces. And in the phase that the Space Force is in right now, it's kind of, we got everything established, kind of at initial operation capability, and now we're refining and deepening our interdependency and connectivity between all the organizations.
So you talked about having the chief data officer organization as part of your team there. One of the really interesting critical data challenges that the military is facing in the space domain is wrapped under this category of space domain awareness, which includes space situational awareness, gathering of data about who's where in orbit and what they're doing, characterizing to some extent even intent. There's been a lot of effort in the space domain awareness community to start to think about more open standards, more open flow of data. We have in the US an effort to create an open architecture data repository for civilian space traffic management data, and with the military being an important source of that data. Are you having your team think in new ways about the role of data in space operations? Are there specific initiatives you can talk about that are helping to leverage modern ways of handling data and applying it to problems?
Yeah, it's quite frankly, it's all about the data. And from space domain awareness, sort of as a start point, certainly the United States and all the allies are, that's priority one. I'm about 5 years into the space business. I'm an Army aviator by trade and got into space back in Canada about 5 or 6 years ago. And when I started to gain an understanding of what we're actually tracking in space as opposed to what we would actually like to be tracking, now that space has transitioned to a warfighting domain, I could use an analogy. It's a bit of a rough analogy, but I've used an analogy before about an air traffic control zone. By estimates that I've seen, we're probably tracking, certainly less than 50%, probably closer to the 20 to 30% range of what we would actually like to be tracking in a warfighting domain. And if I told you in an air traffic control zone, or if I went up to a commander and told him that him or her that I was tracking only 20 to 30% of all the aircraft coming in and out of the zone, what's going on in that zone, they probably wouldn't be very satisfied with that. So to say that we've got a lot of work to do to collectively to raise our space domain awareness would certainly be an understatement. So, data is certainly core to all of that. And one of the things it's all about the data. One of the things we're realizing now is one of the things that we have to focus on the most is how have we mapped our data? Have we organized our data so that it's discoverable, so that it's been validated, that it's shareable, that it's knowable, certainly within the Space Force, but then with all of our allies and partners, whether it's military, civilian, interagency partners. It's all about sharing the data, and we're all working as quickly as we can to make sure that while we're working on new data agreements, while we're working on new capabilities, we're also working on the data that we already have. Are we making best use of it? And both through my chief data officer team, my astrodynamics team, and then to some extent my digital transformation team that's focused on digital operations, which includes space domain awareness. Certainly all of that is core to what we're trying to do to raise the space domain awareness for our warfighters in our deltas.
It seems like that's one of those items that's at the heart or the crux of every other problem we face in the space domain. And we've made the problem a little harder, or rather, others have made the problem a little harder. I guess you've picked up quite a bit of additional data as we watched the Russians attempt and succeed in a kinetic energy anti-satellite weapons test just a couple weeks ago. How are you seeing the developments in the aftermath of that and the demands from the civilian space community, from international partners and third-party nations around the world for more insight into the effect on the space environment from that irresponsible test?
Yeah, it's remarkably irresponsible behavior. I mean, we are maxing out a lot of our systems and capabilities. Prior to that, we were already doing everything we could think of to raise the level and quality of our space domain awareness. Now, with that test at the altitude at which they did it, it's adding, the last estimates I saw, and I don't have the fine detail, somewhere between 1,500, 1,800 pieces, which I know our space domain awareness, experts are cataloging and refining, but somewhere between 1,500 and 1,800 sort of is kind of the range. That's a very unhelpful addition to our systems, our people, to have to now catalog, manage, and track. That's a huge, that's a significant percentage of increase. I think we're tracking, 25 to 30,000, pieces, parts, kind of the size of your fist, as I understand it. And now this adds another 1,000, 1,500 pieces to that list, and that's just not helpful for anyone. But it does, illustrate the magnitude of what we have to deal with. And, even the LEO proliferation for companies like SpaceX and others that are out in these large LEO constellations, that's another challenge for us. So yeah, space domain awareness is foundational to warfighting. And just as reconnaissance and intelligence would be to any domain, you got to know what's going on in the domain, where everything is, as much as possible, to make decisions on how you're acting and how you're providing deterrence, defense, or when necessary, defeat capabilities. So yeah, it's foundational for sure.
Yeah, certainly a concerning situation, and one where getting the right information out to all the operators who are affected by this increased risk is a key step. Let me shift gears, if I can, for a bit, General Whale, and ask you to reflect a little bit more on your experience as a Canadian senior officer serving as part of the team in the U.S. Space Force. Can you talk a little bit more broadly about that experience and some of the pluses and minuses and the kind of the community of officers serving in the area with you?
Yeah, so I guess I would broaden it to any of the allies working inside the Space Force. This is my second experience as an exchange officer. I did a exchange tour in Fort Hood, Texas, as an Army aviator. That was a two-way exchange where an American went up to Canada and I came down to Texas. This one, for now, is a one-way exchange to get the position established, and it's an indication of the sense of urgency that Canada and other allies have, that we're all trying to figure out to kind of catch up to the domain, the changes in the domain, the congested, contested, competitive nature of this warfighting domain. We are all advancing with a sense of urgency within our own context. So the United States has stood up a Space Force. Canada is standing up a Space Division. The UK has stood up a Space Command. Everybody is moving forward within their context, but we're all upping our game in space, including exchange positions. So all of the other allies, the Five Eyes for sure, are looking at where do they have the right people in the right positions for the integration of space capability and achieving deterrence and the defensive space. So my experience here, when I got here, again, because the organization was kind of transforming itself, I supported General Whiting on a few initiatives that he wanted me to focus on. And then as the command took shape, I've transitioned into this transformation role. Space is 100% a team sport. And I describe it that way because if you think of space, we treat it as an area of operations, as vast as it is. When you go into an area of operations in a sort of legacy, traditional joint operation, you become a team very quickly. Well, if you're in space at all, and all of the allies have capabilities in space, you're in that area of operation. So you have to work together. And we say allies and partners, we mean all allies and partners, military allies, national partnerships with national space agencies, the intelligence community here in the US and other interagency partners, and then all the commercial partners. If you're in space, you have to work together. It's not even a choice. So being here as Space Force is forming and having the opportunity to offer my perspective to General Whiting and the team as they're forming and as we're getting after, in my team's case, our transformation objectives. It's a huge privilege and opportunity that I'm very proud to have the opportunity to be part of the stand-up of Space Force. And I can tell you, this isn't, I'm listened to. So I give my advice very, I'm very diligent about the advice that I provide because it's listened to right up to the highest level. And that's the level of teamwork and team perspective that the Space Force is rightfully taking as all of our nations up our game in space.
That's a really great perspective on the need for teamwork and the way we operate it. Space is, as you know, is a really complicated domain, and obviously humans don't naturally exist there, and it takes a lot of effort to get things in orbit, and they're all systems of systems. Ever since Sputnik, we don't operate any one system alone. That interdependency extends to the human level and the international. I should mention, one of the first papers that this Center for Space Policy and Strategy published was a study on the barriers and the techniques for overcoming them in the area of international collaboration in space, particularly on the military side. And we did it as a case study of US-Canadian cooperation, and it was co-authored by a US and Canadian former officers, retired officers, reflecting on their experience. Even in the case of that most close of relationships, the barriers were real. Classification certainly among them, but information technology and many others. Do you find in approaching your role with Space Operations Command that your experience of operating on the smaller partner side of that alliance affects how maybe the challenges and opportunities that you see and that you bring up on the priority list for addressing?
Yeah, so you will have heard all the way up to the recently retired vice chairman talking about the challenges of we're just not moving fast enough in integrating allies and partners. We say when I got here, one of the things that struck me is every US strategic document rightfully highlights our strategic advantage in space is allies and partners. It's the one thing we have that potential adversaries do not, certainly in the same way. I have seen remarkable progress, especially in the last few years, on releasability and classification issues. We've received direction from higher, right up from the secretary level of, knock off the no foreign by default, switching the paradigm to don't just go to no foreign if you're unsure. You have to actually ask permission almost to use the no foreign. Convince me why it has to be no foreign. But it's not just as simple as as you know from your study, it's not just a simple, there's nobody not trying to be integrated, but there's political issues, there's policy issues, there's technical issues, there's in some cases budgetary issues. If somebody classified something 10 years ago, how do you find out when it can be declassified? All of these things fit together. It really is a wicked problem that I can tell you for sure. The allies are pushing hard, and the senior leadership of the Space Forces are listening, and they're trying to do everything they can to move the yardstick on the integration of allies and partners. Even from my own experience being here in this building has caused some changes where, we got a Canadian general in the room. So sorry, this is a no foreign briefing. Well, wait a minute, is the whole briefing no foreign, or is it just a piece of it? Well, why don't you move that to the end of the briefing, and let's do a releasable briefing for the majority of the engagement with all the allies and partners that we can bring in, and then it's no issue at the end of that to have your own national kind of level of engagement for true no foreign issues. So there's all of that we need to keep the pressure up on it, and one of the reasons Canada and other allies are keen to put senior positions here in Space Force is because that's how serious we are about the need for integration. That's how serious the Space Force is about the integration, and just being here drives some of that conversation and some of those requirements. And one of the things that we're trying to focus on now is sort of this concept of moving to allies and partners by design. And what do I mean by that? We all, as nations, we're busy, depending on the size of our organizations, where there's complexities. We're all kind of focused on our own business, and then we've kind of gotten used to in joint operations, deploying into an area of operations, and then trying to make our radios talk to each other and try to have compatible, sustainment capabilities and all those kind of things. It's almost like an afterthought, like not 100%, but we work on our own stuff, and then we try to figure out, let's get together and figure out how we can work together. We really need to shift to a mindset of allies and partners by design. So from the start, say the U.S. or any nation is about to work on a new command and control system. You need to bring in allies and partners from day one to figure out how you can move forward with interoperability from day one, not as an after effect to say, hey, we built this great system, do you want to buy some of it? That's just too slow and too kind of backwards engineered. So we need to figure out, I would offer across the joint forces, but certainly in space capabilities, how can we do business by design? I could use another example of different capabilities. All nations, Canada and others, are going to go after capabilities that are required for national requirements. But the next question after that is, if I'm going to go after this capability anyways, what's interesting to my allies and partners? What would be a strategic contribution or burden sharing that I can build into this capability so that we can have a collective resilience and interoperability that's greater than any one nation can do on its own, including the United States. So we're certainly trying to do, my military partnership and international engagement team is focused on that from our generate, present, sustain mission set, and we're establishing deeper ties with Space Systems Command on the acquisition side. So all of that, we need to raise our game as much as we can by allies and partners by design.
You've had the opportunity to be in a key senior leadership role for the really devising Canada's approach to the space domain in one of your previous roles. Now you've had the chance to sit at the Space Operations Command and see how this looks from the U.S. side. Are there lessons you're going to carry back if you do another tour in Ottawa to how Canada should be thinking about capability development and areas of focus?
I would say we were already focused on the right things, largely through efforts like the Combined Space Operations Initiative, which started as 4 eyes, moved to 5 eyes, went to 7 eyes, as I'll refer to it, including Germany and France. And now we're bringing, that organization is bringing in nations like Japan and Italy. So there are like-minded nations that have been working together for a long time to try and figure out how to get after this. So I think we were already on the right path. But again, with that sense of urgency, with the changes that are happening in the space domain, we've all kind of raised our intensity level on the things that we were working on. When I used to represent Canadian capabilities, like for example, Canada has the Sapphire satellite, optical satellite integrated into the U.S. space surveillance network. That's an illustration of the level of integration that we have. We're working to replace that capability. As we were working on that design, we certainly had a lot of conversations with the United States on, we need contributions for Canadian space domain awareness. But what would be exciting and a strategic contribution for Canada's burden sharing amongst the Five Eyes, amongst the CSPO nations? What can we contribute that would be strategic for others, not just for Canada? So I would say I think we were focused on the right things. Like other nations, we've accelerated our pace. And what I would take back is I think we're on the right path. Just keep the pace moving. Just keep moving the yardstick. For example, Canada is standing up a space division. We were aiming at 2024, and the decision has been made. It may stand up as early as next summer. So we're trying to move things forward and not to the right. We're moving things to the left wherever we can.
Well, that's terrific to see, and certainly something that's on a lot of agendas right now, and figuring out how to do that without taking missteps or running down the wrong paths into cul-de-sacs is a critical challenge. You were just talking about what I would describe as the broadening of international cooperation in space and this evolution 4 to 5 to 7 eyes and now beyond. How do you think the senior leadership in the US should be thinking about that topic and the advantages of continuing to broaden and bring in additional partners, Japan and so forth, vice the hard work of deepening the relationships and opening doors to the sort of more the innermost circle of partners, which as we've already discussed is pretty hard in a highly classified area like space.
Yeah, so again, I would refer back to kind of the approach from the Combined Space Operations Initiative, where there were kind of three levels. There's cooperation, there's collaboration, and then there's integration. And you could almost draw sort of some concentric rings of any like-minded nation that wants to come into this dialogue and start probably at the collaboration stage or cooperation stage, which means I'd like to understand what you're doing. I'm going to share with you what I'm doing. Where are the interdependencies there? How can we potentially share data or those kind of things? When you get into collaboration, you might start working together on the same project, or hey, you get one of these and I'll get one, and we'll maybe have them work together. But when you get into integration, that's a whole nother level. And there's any level that any country wants to contribute to or move through kind of that spectrum is valuable and invaluable right now. So, the question is, we need to resist the sort of temptation to be all the same at the same level. There's nothing wrong with binational integration in some cases, collaboration in other cases if a nation's just kind of getting into sharing some of its space capabilities or data. The question is, what's the right recipe? What's the right mix at the time? And there's certainly nothing wrong with a nation starting in one area and over time, if they want to, moving to a deeper level all the way to integration. And I could use an example of our federated space operations centers kind of concept. So you've got the Combined Space Operations Center in Vandenberg, where there are Canadians, Australians, some British. That's the place where we're trying to synchronize our planning and burden sharing capabilities. Canada has a Space Operations Center, the CAN SPOC. The UK has the UK SPOC. Australia has the OSPOC. I can tell you the Allies don't just want to feed off of the CSPOC in Vandenberg. We're not really that keen on sending hundreds more people down there to run a center there. We want a federated SPOC concept. So why can't some of the other SPOCs, and we're working on this, do burden sharing, so providing daily mission capability to the CSPOC. So then you can have backup capabilities. You can have some of the Canadians that are in the CANSPOC were actually trained in the CSPOC and our U.S. training system. So if we can get connectivity to some of the space domain awareness networks and those kind of things, we can actually do mission capabilities and provide it to the CSPOC. So a federated SPOC concept, which again creates a total that's greater, more redundant, more resilient. That's an example of the kind of integration that we can achieve. And you're probably tracking Operation Olympic Defender. One of the things that came out of the CSPO initiative was MOUs, binational and multinational agreements are great, but we're doing operations now, and we don't do operations by MOUs. We do them by op orders. So when Stratcom brought Olympic Defender down to the Five Eyes secret level, that enabled at least the Five Eyes for now, and other CSPO partners are on the edges of that, hopefully moving towards that. We can all have presented or retained capabilities depending on the scale of whatever operation is going on at the time. So we have a standing framework which allows us to exercise synchronization, rules of engagement, laws of armed conflict, whether a capability is presented or retained depending on the requirements of the combined forces, Space Component Commander, the CIFSIC. So we're doing, again, on operations, we're getting down to the integrated level. Some of the nations that are newer to the CSPO initiative are maybe at the collaboration stage, but they're starting to talk now about data sharing agreements if they don't have them already, or updating them. So it's kind of a constant flow, as close as you can get to integration, depending on your national and shared objectives.
That's a great perspective there, and the having the graduated approaches, right? It offers partners a chance to work at the level that they're comfortable with and capable of. One of the things that comes up a lot when I'm talking to senior leadership around the world in partner nations is this balance between sovereign capabilities and how much does a nation with a medium-sized armed force, and in most cases national security needs that exceed the capabilities of that medium-sized armed force, how do they think about what they need to have complete control of, what they can be interdependent on, and where they're frankly just willing to consume a service, which in the space community until fairly recently, a lot of the world's been in that position, right? We're happy to use other people's free services. We're probably not going to rely on them on our nation's worst day, but we're going to be eager to use them 99% of the time. Views on that seem to be changing. Right? More nations are thinking about sovereign capabilities here at the same time that they're thinking about more interdependence and more collaboration. And how do you see those tensions playing out over the next 10 years or so?
So this is part of what we're starting to kind of flesh out with the concept of allies and partners by design. Again, most nations would kind of start from our own capability and requirements, and we will think of, what do we need to own for ourselves from a joint point of view? What level do they need to be owned and operated at? Again, presented or retained, and then what will we accept as a coalition dependency? And how we've traditionally approached dependencies is that they're a negative. What risk am I entertaining by having a dependency on capability X or Y? Well, I think we need to start thinking about flipping that, and what opportunity am I missing by not accepting a trusted ally to go deeper into a capability and with assurances that I'm going to be able to, that's going to be shared with me, that frees up my enterprise to focus on other things, to reprioritize some resources, money or people on things that I might not have been able to get to. So if we're serious about our assessment that no nation can deal with everything they need in space on their own, and I think that's a true statement even for a nation with as many capabilities as the United States have. I just don't think it's possible for one nation. So if we accept that as true, we've got these longstanding deep alliances and partnerships. Why would we not take advantage of those and try to work together to develop a collective architecture that is far more resilient, far more interoperable than we would have been able to create if we tried to do everything on our own. So I think I'm certain we're heading towards that direction. We're trying to kind of accelerate that pace. And again, even just how you frame it, is a coalition dependency a risk, or is it actually an opportunity? And if you frame it as an opportunity, it frees up your own capabilities to be focused on things that you might not otherwise have been able to address.
So speaking of interdependencies, you've had a number of crossovers in your career, and you briefly mentioned earlier that you began your career as an Army aviator, rotary wing aviator. We're in the middle of creating and standing up and getting going with a new military service here in the United States for space. But as a former Army officer, now Royal Canadian Air Force officer, do you have advice for U.S. Space Force leadership about how to think about the joint partners that depend on space capabilities and maybe balancing, thinking about maintaining domain superiority versus providing those joint effects?
Yeah, so I could just refer to my personal experience. When I received the request from commander of the RCF, and right now in Canada, our space capabilities were kind of incubated in a joint organization, but they were getting to the size where that organization really didn't have the framework and the enterprise horsepower that needed to move it forward. So Canada decided to move the Canadian Armed Forces Joint Space Program. So it's still a joint space capability, but the responsibility, the functional authority has been handed to the RCAF. So now the RCAF is responsible for two domains, air and space. I know when I stepped into space, it's certainly a steep learning curve. And we've already made adjustments over the last 3 to 4 years that it's not right that a one-star officer steps into a new domain with no background in it. I benefited from space. I'm the poster child of not noticing what's been happening in the domain. I spent a 30-year career in Army aviation benefiting from everything space, communications, navigation, ISR imagery for landing zones, all of that kind of capability that was just always there. I never gave it a second's thought until I got into the space capability in Canada. Again, the first year was a pretty steep learning curve, but one of the conclusions I came to, as all of the allies I think have come to, as space transitions to an operational or warfighting, depending on your doctrine, domain, we know how to do operations. And there are unique things in the space domain that we need to take account for. But again, when you're talking about, like, for example, Olympic Defender, we know how to do presented and retained capabilities. I've been on NATO operations where, in some cases, my nation has retained capabilities but provided effects. Like, we would accepted taskings, but we haven't presented that capability. And in other cases, again, depending on the requirements of the operations, you present that capability because that's where it needs to be. That's the right level that it needs to be at. We understand how to do joint operations. We just now need to integrate that all domain, pan domain sort of elements of, for space. We need to integrate that like we do in any other capability. So I think all of the allies and partners have recognized we know how to do this. We've just got to be cognizant of the uniqueness of the space domain, similar to like cyber. We need to integrate this into an all our pan domain capability set.
So many of the lessons carry over, but we got to figure out which ones don't, right? So that's a great insight.
And some of the challenges is another thing that I've come to understand is in the land domain, we had thousands of years essentially to work out the norms of behavior, how we conduct ourselves. At sea, it probably took a couple hundred years to work out international laws of the sea, which are still in some cases, kind of being debated. In the air domain, we probably had a matter of decades to kind of work that out. Well, now with cyber and space, we've got years to try and figure it all out. So we need to take the lessons from other domains that are applicable to this domain and the integration of all the domains, and yet not forget that there are some things in space that are unique. And that's the balance that doctrinally and from a joint, combined and joint perspective, we're all trying to kind of solidify and work out.
Well, General Whale, you've covered a lot of terrain in a short conversation here, and we're really grateful for your time and your insights, and for this is an individual substantive conversation, but it's also a symbolic one, and we're grateful for the partnership between the U.S. and Canada, and as represented by your service here now with the Space Force, the Space Operations Command. So thanks so much for joining us and for sharing some of these thoughts that will hopefully help our viewers make smart decisions and lead the space community in productive directions. Grateful for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a privilege to be a part of standing up a new service and to contribute to the alliance between our two great nations. So appreciate your time as well.
Thank you.
And thank you, Jamie and General Whale. That term, allies and partners by design, is a great way to think about the future of international partnerships for defense space. And thanks to our fantastic production team, Colleen Stover, James Liggins, and Jordan Bingham. Check us out on Twitter using hashtag the Space Policy Show. Sign up for news and alerts at aerospace.org/policy. And be sure to look for our podcasts and share your favorite episodes with colleagues. We look forward to having you tune into the next episode of the Space Policy Show. And until then, take care.